Hello, Bronx friends and neighbors, and welcome to Bronx Talk. Now, this may sound incredible, but it's true. During their recent day of collective action and giving, the Bronx Community Foundation distributed 200 new laptops to kids that need them, as well as more than $100,000 to 6 community-based organizations that provide important services in the borough of the Bronx. It's part of their ongoing commitment to fighting the digital divide and making investments in community power to eradicate inequity and build sustainable futures for all Bronxites. So we're going to get right to it. Please join me in welcoming the Foundation's new Executive Director, Latoya Williams-Belfort. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That was an extraordinary event. We're going to talk in detail about it. But this is an exciting time for the Bronx Community Foundation.
Yes.
So let's just back up a little bit, start with its founding and its mission, and bring us up to date on the current effort to achieve the goals, the very lofty but vital goals that I mentioned a moment ago.
So thank you for having me again.
Of course.
The foundation, which many people don't realize, the Bronx Community Foundation, is just about 10 years old. So it's been doing really good work.
I have to volunteer that I realize it because I had them on the air at the beginning. Okay,
Yes.
let's be clear. But
So,
yes, I realize
yes,
it, but
almost
you're right.
10 years old.
Yep.
Founded by two brothers, twin brothers, grew up in the Bronx, Bronx natives, Derek and Desmond Lewis, and really kind of got down on the ground in the work during the COVID relief effort. Really, Derek and Desmond launched the foundation. They were out in the community and really responding to the needs during such a critical time. And I think because the Bronx Community Foundation was so successful in the COVID relief effort, we continued our work as an organization and really started to focus in on 4 areas. So thinking about the digital crisis, the digital divide in the Bronx, thinking about public health, economic security, and equity and justice. So the organization works in those 4 pillars. And I think, what's most impressive to me is that we are the one and only community foundation, and I'm sure we will talk in more detail about what that means and what that means in a landscape like the Bronx, which is so interesting to myself. But we've been able to invest over $15 million over the last 9+ years into the community to drive equitable opportunity and resources for children and families.
Why did Gary just break into a wide smile? I don't know. But we're going to get into all that. I just want people to get to meet you because you are an important figure in the Bronx. So I pulled it right out of the bio. Partnership with children, the Jericho Project, Children of Promise NYC, United Way of New York City. How did those things fuel where you are now, and this really is a major, not to minimize the importance of those things.
No, it's a full circle moment.
This is a big moment. What did you learn? What comes out of that brings you to this point?
Well, I think I'll even go back a few steps further before my professional career. I think what I'm most proud of when I think about what I call my testimony is that I'm a Bronx native, right? So I was born in Manhattan.
A Bronx girl,
I was born in Manhattan. I was raised in the Bronx, the Northeast Bronx. And I was raised in a family of, really hardworking, smart folks that were, just trying day to day to, grab their piece of what it meant to be a thriving, surviving family in the Bronx. Now I can put language to that and understand that my family members were fighting against systemic barriers. But back then, I just knew that, they were working really hard, they were trying really hard, they were getting knocked down, they were getting back up. I think simultaneous to that, I grew up in the Pentecostal church, in a huge church in Harlem. And again, that gave me a real kind of foundation of service. And I think,
a community.
Yeah, absolutely. And so fast forward, graduating college and getting into the workforce, I knew that I wanted to help and be in service to and support of communities like, where I came from, where I grew up and developed, my church community. And I was the first in my family to go to college and, break through a lot of those systemic challenges. And I received a lot of support from community nonprofits and foundations.
I was waiting for the punchline.
Yeah. I mean, I went to college because a college access program helped me to fill out my applications and do the thing.
So you understood the nature and the importance of those things from a very personal level.
I am a living, breathing framework.
Is this a difficult time for community-driven philanthropy?
Yeah.
In other words, is it a hard sell?
Yeah.
To me, I'm like, yeah, go, let's rock. But is it a hard sell?
Yeah, I mean, I think the work has always been difficult, right? So I've been doing this work for 25 plus years. I've worked in supportive housing, I've worked in education, I've worked in mental health. And it's not an easy proposition. You know, we're not selling widgets, so people don't clearly understand the intrinsic value all the time. But I think there's definitely been moments in the 25 plus career that have been more difficult. And I think in this current climate, you know, as we think about what is going on in the world and how we are thinking about equitable opportunity and how we're thinking about communities that have been traditionally excluded, there's more difficulty, I think, now.
And I'm willing to venture a guess that when you see the smiles, because I saw some of the video, when you see the smiles on the recipients of grants, hardworking, really good organizations that deserve the opportunity to continue to serve, and you see their smiles, all of a sudden it's like, well, it wasn't that difficult. You know, it probably makes you feel a lot better.
Absolutely.
I want to, let's get right to it and talk about the digital divide.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things you just expressed was that, you know, it's hard to convince people, but there is data. And so we have a thing that I pulled offline from the Center for the Urban Future that says 22.4 of Bronx households lack broadband at home. 1 in 3 Bronx households lack access to a computer. 11.5% of Bronx students are enrolled in a computer science course. So that means they want to do it, but they don't have the devices. The first thing I just want to mention, because it connects all the dots, the Center for an Urban Future was, and this study was based on a grant from the Bronx
Community Foundation.
So when the data wasn't there, think of how smart this is. They went out and got an organization to create the data. So how did we get to the point where we've fallen behind? Because those numbers that you saw are only the beginning, but they're worse than all of the other boroughs in New York City. How did the Bronx get into that position?
Well, I think, you know, the Bronx is a great place with, you know, magnificent people, but we have some historical challenges as it relates to how we are fighting many systemic challenges and how we are working really hard to kind of change the trajectory of poverty in the Bronx. And I think the digital divide is a clear indicator that we still have a lot of work to do in 2026. You know, families and young people have to be able to have access to technology to compete across the landscape, right? So from a workforce, from an education, now in 2026, even a social engagement. And for young people, that social engagement is directly connected to social and emotional development, right? And mental health. So the digital divide is a very nuanced issue. And I always say it's a public health crisis, right? In the Bronx, if we cannot close the digital divide or significantly reduce it, we're going to have a generation of young people who cannot cannot compete in workforce, in education, and we need them to have successful outcomes, again, to really be able to elevate beyond some of these systemic barriers.
You know, I don't always insert my own personal situation, and I hadn't thought about this, but the organization that now manages the buildings that I live in, if you give them a check, a regular check, and say, here's my rent check, it doesn't deposit for like 4 weeks, and they're making everybody have to do it online. And I just realized this discussion that you say, well, they can't really compete in the situation if you're a senior citizen or you're a young person who doesn't have access.
Exactly.
I got to pay my rent.
Right. It continues to drive the divide across many areas much deeper and further.
So let's talk about that day of collective action. It was back in March. What was it designed to demonstrate, not only about the fact that, and we have there's some video that you guys provided of giving away the laptops, but it really said a lot about collaboration and collective impact.
Action,
talk about that and talk about getting to that point where you could actually do this. It's rather extraordinary.
So, I mentioned earlier, I was going to swing back around to the Bronx Community Foundation being the one and only community foundation in the Bronx and why that's significant. We understand at the foundation, in the Bronx, there are over 2,000 direct service nonprofits, right? So those are nonprofits that are providing critical support, food pantries, mental health services, physical health services, every day. And at the foundation, one of our core components is to be a driver of resources for those nonprofits, right? The nonprofit industry continues to work really hard to diversify their funding. Many nonprofits don't have staff, that are non-program staff that help them to bring in funders and bring in donations. So that is really kind of where we fit into the matrix, so to speak. And we were really happy for the Day of Action to be able to bring together elected officials, business leaders, community organizations to first and foremost be able to provide devices directly to families and young people, right? To be able to create that community connectivity, because the Bronx Community Foundation, we like to say it is by us, for us. And that's really important. And we want, Bronxites to know that we're here advocating, working, and raising capital on their behalf. And then as it relates to the nonprofit community, we were really excited to be able to provide grants so that they can continue to do their work in this critical time, right? The grants are unrestricted, which is really important too. We want you to use those dollars in the ways that it best supports your organization and your
Without
impact.
you dictating to them what it...
Absolutely. We are working from a trust-based philanthropy landscape, and those grants are really important to the sustainability of Bronx nonprofits.
Who gets the laptops? Now, I mean, in the short video we just showed, I mean, there were young people.
Yes.
I thought I saw somebody who was a little older,
Yep.
maybe a college student or even a mom, let's
Yep,
say.
yep.
How do you select?
So we use
Everybody.
data, right? Everybody gets a laptop. We're working towards that.
I know
That
you
is the
are.
goal.
I know you are.
But we use data. We work with community-based organizations. We have a participatory grant strategy that we work from at the foundation. So I'm not deciding. Our board is not deciding. We are using community input and community voice. So we work with nonprofits across the Bronx. We look at the different populations, when we think about seniors and veterans and young people, college age folks, and we look at the zip codes across the Bronx, and we want to make sure that we're working towards borough-wide impact. So through our participatory grant strategy, we come up with recipient lists for different events and opportunities.
In the larger world, and I must ask this, there are states throughout the country that are being careful with technology.
Yeah.
They're prohibiting them for use in preschool and kindergarten
Yeah.
without getting into the legislation that's being debated all over the place. Monitoring use for teens, obviously, kids do the wrong thing. It gets into bullying and other kinds of things that make people uncomfortable. I'm assuming that you're in with all of that and that you want to have the proper place for technology. Maybe you can address some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. When we are working towards our digital divide strategies, we are thinking of a few KPIs, right? We're thinking about access and opportunity. How do we get devices into the hands of folks that need them? We're thinking about AI, right? And everything that is transposing. And as we continue to push forward to close the digital divide, how are we working synergetically so that populations don't continue to be left behind with the advancement of AI, right? Because that is a train that is moving at lightning speed.
Yes, but AI to be used in the right way rather than have Gary say some things that he didn't really say.
And then I think,
or elected officials and others.
Absolutely.
Of course.
And on the other side of that, what we do in combination with those two efforts is provide training. So we make sure that those 200 families that received laptops from us, that they're getting cyber safety, social, AI training, so they know how to use the devices in the right ways. And they have a tool that is going to support their long-term goals.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned, we hear from communities. What are people telling you? We can talk about larger issues, but specifically about computers. And do you hear anecdotes or stories or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, in relation to the need, absolutely. We hear about, the need. We hear about, how we need to continue to engage and invest because the technology ages very quickly as well, right? So we need to make sure that we're able to provide the appropriate technology for the appropriate needs. And we need to be able to work with, business leaders, technology companies, folks that are really at the center of the issue, because we gave out 200 laptops, but, there's 1.4 million people in the Bronx. And when we think about the need, we have to continue to be strategic and have a cadence that is really going to help close the digital divide.
I have the number right in front of me. The Bronx has the lowest rate of device ownership, 1 in 3 households which is, folks, 184,000 homes lacking access to computers. So, and I live in an apartment building. I know some people do. The people in your building divided by 3, by whatever it is, 1 in 3 divided by 33%. And those people that you see in the elevator may not have this simple access to it.
And when you think about the daily need, when you go to apply for a job now, and everybody says, put in your application online. If you get the job or you don't get the job, we'll send you an email. Everything is happening in a technology universe. So when you think about the most everyday actions, right, you really need to be
again, I think about myself, a lot of it is research, and you mentioned AI, so you can ask, obviously, any question at all, and then it provides you some statistic or some information about it. If you don't have that, you are really behind the 8 ball, especially in this day and age. I want to talk about the politics of this, and you were very, very upfront, and you had an op-ed piece in the Bronx Times, and now the 100 days of Mayor Mamdani are up, but you urged him to focus on the Bronx, where, of course, our systemic inequities run deepest, the need is greatest. Are you satisfied that he heard the message? Where are we at, and how do you view what is coming down at the moment from City Hall?
I think City Hall is doing an amazing job to really think about policies and infrastructure and ways to support the city as a whole. I think the Bronx is a very unique place, and I know that the mayor understands that because he started his campaign on Fordham
Road,
right? So I think he understands that the Bronx has, a very deep need for some of the policies that he's advancing. And listen, as the only community foundation in the Bronx that's driving resources, really thinking strategically about collective action, understanding intrinsically that it is going to take elected officials, private businesses, foundations, marching to that same beat drum. We want to work really closely with the mayor. And we are making our rounds to make the appropriate introductions. He's appointed a lot of, new, very amazing people to his team. So, we're taking all the steps to be a partner in his work because we think he's on the right track.
One of the things I think that is real important for somebody who takes the position that you have taken is have really good vision. And I pulled something out of the op-ed piece that you wrote. We're gonna put it up on the screen. I thought this showed, in my mind, real good vision. Your words, the Bronx has never been defined by hardship, and a lot of people wouldn't believe that because that's who they think we are. It's creative, resilient, and fueled by a spirit that refuses to quit. A borough undergoing rebirth as once marginalized groups claim power and break barriers. I wanted to personally thank you for that because I talk about this all the time when doing this TV show. Nobody knows who we really are. And when you walk into the deli and you see people and you know who they are, and even if you don't know them personally, you know what the deal is, and we all get along. And I just love the notion that we're not defined by hardship, and we're much more defined by all those other things about that. How do you put that into play? How do you enact that vision? I have the same vision, and this is how I do it.
No, I believe that intrinsically, first and foremost. I think that I am a living, breathing testimony of that statement. So I think every piece of my being and my experience to date is validation, data, community, in motion towards that statement. So I think that's the first way that I walk into the world. I've traveled many places. I've been very lucky, again, because of community and village and support and opportunity. And, I meet a lot of people. And, again, that real understanding of the Bronx and the movements that have been started here, community movements, cultural movements, music, we really, have showcased, that we have the power and the resilience. The Bronx has launched so many successful people like yourself.
There you go.
Political figures and actors and musicians and, activists. So I think the proof is in the pudding, right? It's really about scale. It's really about how do we drive resources to create the opportunities that I've had at scale.
You've segued perfectly into what I want to talk about next, because I don't want folks to think that it's only about the digital divide,
Right.
Economic opportunity and stability. So what do we need to do? What can you do? What can we all do to strengthen long-term economic opportunity and stability in the Bronx?
I love that question. That's perfect.
Okay, well, that's why you're here.
Well, I think, listen, again, our core mission as the Bronx Community Foundation is to drive resources into the borough, right? We want to be able to fund nonprofits that are doing critical work. We want to be able to work in partnership with government. We want to be able to create frameworks and solutions that are on the ground, through the voice of Bronxites, and all of that takes capital, right? 15 million already into the work, and we want to scale, and we want to do this work at a broader borough-wide level. And our goal is $20 million over the next 10 years, right?
Okay.
So we've been able to support over 275,000 Bronxites over the last 10 years. 15,275,000. We're looking towards another 20 million. And what we are framing as
Now you're looking at 500,000 people.
borough-wide impact, 800,000.
Wow, more than 500,000 people.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll add is that most people don't obviously realize this, but I thought it was such an interesting data point that the Bronx, 60% of Bronxites are 35 and under. So when we think about what does that $50 million do, and how do we see those dollars in action? Right? If we drive in the right resources, we create equitable opportunity, we work to close the digital divide, we have a whole group of people now that are active in our economy, starting businesses, doing all the things to really dismantle generational barriers.
And you're creating a future, because
Absolutely.
if you start young. Now, in this day and age, in terms of expanding the reach, Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition just became Our Bronx. We did a show on that the other day. There's the Bronx First Coalition, which is a large coalition of not-for-profits. If you have your ear to the ground, and I know you do, there seems to be, and from where I sit, a growing energy of this collaboration. Now, one number which I haven't updated, that there were 1,200 nonprofits in the Bronx. And of course, that includes religious institutions, et cetera.
Over 2,000 now.
Now there was always,
Over
thank you for
2,000.
updating me. I've been doing this too long. I kept the old number.
Well, and there could, because we have so many that are rapidly,
the poverty rate for seniors,
Yep.
overcrowded schools, need for affordable housing, ongoing public health needs. These are all things that are on your table.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing, and it sounds like you believe you can do that with this Bronx community.
Together. And I think that is the key. When we talk about collective action, we will not do it alone. We cannot do it alone. We don't want to duplicate efforts. We want to reduce redundancy. We want to make sure that the money that's coming in and the investment being made is being, strategically allocated. And we want to make sure that we're tracking all of this work with data.
As I understand it, this is, in a way, non-traditional philanthropy.
Yeah.
So if you could just identify for us, what is traditional philanthropy?
Yeah.
And we're the Bronx, so we invent everything. So what is non-traditional philanthropy, and how does that work, and why do you think it works so well for the BX?
Yeah, so, I think, again, I've been doing this work. I've been working in philanthropy all around the industry in many roles and with many communities for 25 years. And when I started this work, it was a notion in the philanthropic sector that, you had a certain segment of people that donated to support another segment of people, right? And I think what we've seen throughout the work is that, whether you're from the Bronx, I always say if you have a intrinsic connection to the borough, or you don't, right? Supporting Bronxites, supporting communities that have been historically left behind is good economics, right? The more that people,
I'm sorry, of course.
right, can participate equitably in our economy, it is more, it's just better inclusive, economics. And I think that is really where you start to see the shift in how people think about philanthropy and what those dollars are doing, and how it really is everyone's problem, and that we all have a place or a piece of the pie that we should take seriously to make sure that folks have an opportunity to engage.
As somebody who's been here for a while, I always pick this one moment, and maybe you're not aware of it because, of course, I was doing TV at that time. In the late 90s, Freddie Ferrer did a press conference. He was the borough president.
Yep.
Stood under the L at 161st Street and had a big poster. I'm trying to find the poster. I can't find it. Of somebody throwing paper into garbage, and it said, "Don't dump on the Bronx."
That's right.
And I think at that moment, that defined for a lot of people, you know what? We're not going to take it anymore.
Right.
And this, to me, even though it's coming, 25 years, 26 years later, is exactly what that's about. That now we're going to take care of it ourselves.
Yeah.
We're not going to wait for anybody to do it for us, and that's what this is about. So let's see. You looking? We're going to wrap it up. The website. Talk about the website. People can volunteer, donate, be part. How do they be part of this movement with the Bronx Community Foundation? So collective impact, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're looking
That's right. That's it. I think first we just want to kind of double click on the notion that this is for everyone. So if you are a young person and you're figuring out, philanthropy, that sounds like such a big word. How do I get involved? This is your community. This is for you. You can reach out to us on social media. You can go to our website, thebronx.org. We're at Bronx Foundation on Instagram. I think there's a place in this work for everyone to use their talents, to use their treasures, to use their networks and their communities to move this work forward. I think the second thing that I would highlight is that, if you are a business owner, if you are a business professional, if you are from the Bronx, or if you're not from the Bronx but you care about New York City, I think there's some real returns here economically.
Participate and partner.
Yes.
Latoya Williams-Belfort, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was fantastic.
I couldn't be more thrilled to have you. Because this is what it's about. And clearly she has the vision, she gets it, and now we're going to all share in it. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much.
This is not the last you will hear of Latoya Williams-Belfort, I can guarantee that. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. And that concludes our program. We want to thank our producer, Ray Pagnucco, Bronxnet's production and editing crew, and of course to you too. It's about the people of the Bronx. She knows that. We'll see you next week.